work our way through the 47 financial fitness principles, we are now at principle number 39. Be very, very careful as you make decisions about the danger zones. Get good advice from your financial mentors and study things in detail before taking action.
Danger zones are like the straw that breaks the camel's back. So many people think, oh, I can afford it, and they run themselves right up to the limit to where if they have any downside whatsoever, you know, especially like as an entrepreneur, if you're an entrepreneur, your income can fluctuate 10, 15, 20% a year. It's just a matter of course. And if you drop 20% and yet you're spending right up to your previous level of income, now you're in the danger zone. Now all of a sudden you're looking at assets and having to do fireside sales in order to keep yourself afloat. Why do that? Why not live below your means? Stay out of the danger zone.
Several hundred years ago, in the age, right at the beginning of the age of exploration, the charts and the maps that were made for sailors to use, as they got to the places where no one had ever explored before, the maps would actually be marked and they would say, there be monsters here. And that was a warning that if you sailed that far out, nobody knew what might happen because ships had gone out and never come back. And the thought was there must be monsters. Something horrible is there, it's unknown. Well, that marking, there be monsters here, is what we need to throw up. We need to throw up a big sign that says, careful, danger, Will Rogers, danger, danger, because you're entering into a danger zone. And there are 10 places. We've seen people who they do well financially for months, or they do well financially in several categories, but then they get near one of these danger zones and they mess it up. So there be monsters here. There's danger here. And the first one of these danger zones is taxes.
In taxes, you get somebody that, an entrepreneur or someone that's successful in business, all of a sudden doubles his income, has a banner year. But they forget that when you double your income, the IRS has something to say about that as well. And they tend to like their 50% share or so, somewhere around there. And if you're not planning for that, putting money away for the tax liabilities that you have, the next thing you know, at the end of the year, you've enjoyed this amazing lifestyle and you do not have the money to service your taxes, and you are in trouble. Danger.
You need to make sure that you have a good tax advisor, accountant, bookkeeper set up in your life, especially if you're going to play the entrepreneurial game at all. Because like Orrin says, when you have a job, you're paid on a W-2 situation in the United States, and that income is immediately captured in the records of the federal government, and you're forced to have withholdings immediately. And then at the end of the year, you do a tax return, and you settle everything up. As an entrepreneur, if you're going to add any additional streams of income to your W-2 situation, especially, you need to be very careful to get good advice and capture your ongoing tax liability, because, as Orrin, as you just said, as an entrepreneur, you can have spikes in your good seasons and have a lot of money coming in, and it never ceases to amaze me how many people play fast and loose with the tax law. Listen, the most powerful forces on earth are federal governments, our centralized governments of the countries that we live in. You do not want to be messing with those governments. You do not want to get on their bad side, and you do not want to be spending what they consider to be their money on your lifestyle. That's as foolish as it can be. And we've seen people who have made a lot of money get themselves all messed up. They get behind in property taxes, they get behind in their federal taxes. It's absolutely preposterous to live that way. Be mature. Be an adult. Forward plan. Get good advisors, and don't play fast and loose when it comes with the tax law. You shouldn't pay a penny more than you're required to pay, but you should pay every penny that you are required to pay, and pay it within the defined limits of when you're supposed to. You can file extensions and legally allowed extensions and those kinds of things, but pay the money you're owed, that you owe, when it's due, and don't mess around with taxes. It's a humongous danger zone, especially for people in business for themselves.
Another danger zone is home ownership. I know everybody, but if you buy a house, they always appreciate every year. Well, I think in 2008, we realized that's not really true. And one of the biggest mistakes that people do when they start making more money, when they start, wow, look at this, I'm wiping out debt, I've got everything compounded, look at all this money I have all of a sudden, and my offense is really taking off, I'm making all kinds of good money, that they start calculating and say, wow, we can double the size of our house. And they just do it too quickly. Man, I'm all for enjoying some of the finer things and enjoying some of the nicer houses, but patience. Delayed gratification, man, instead of buying it immediately as you look and say, we can afford it right now, just because the bank says you can afford it, I encourage you to follow the 47 principles that Cris and I lay out. Is take your time, and if you delayed that 6 months or a year and allowed some of that compounding to work for you, you still get the nice house. You'll never remember that it took you an extra year over the next 20, 30 years, and yet you stay out of the danger zone. You're starting to stack all of this, so you start making it work, but you start spending this money too fast. It's like a bobber. You're weighing the bobber down, and eventually you put too much on that bobber, it dunks under the water, and you are in the danger zone.
Home ownership is one of the danger zones for several reasons. Number one, it's such an enormous purchase, and making the wrong choices about how big of a mortgage you have, how big of a home you live in, can have massive long-term ramifications on your financial life. Number two, it's an emotional thing. People get real emotional looking for a home and feeling like what home they want to have, and there's even status parts of it too. You want to be in the right kind of home in the right neighborhood and look the right way, and so you've got to be so careful. And then number three, there's so much misinformation out there, as you said, where people are convinced that their home is their biggest asset. Well, really, it's the biggest hole in the ground in which you pour a lot of money over the course of your life. And it's even arguable. Robert Kiyosaki is famous for shocking people with the fact that, hey, your home probably isn't an asset. It's probably just a drain, which, you know, when he first came out with that kind of talk 15 years ago, it was massively controversial. Now people are kind of gaining acceptance. People are realizing, especially since we've lived through the housing crisis that you mentioned since then, people are realizing, you know, Kiyosaki might have been right about that. So home ownership is one of the financial danger zones. Be careful, there's monsters here because of all those reasons and more. So when it comes time to buying a home, just be very careful. Let the red flags go up in your mind and proceed very cautiously.
Another one of the danger zones is divorce. I mean, tragic at a personal level, tragic for the kids, tragic for the relationships, and also tragic for wealth. When you all of a sudden the income is split in half, plus you got lawyer fees, etc. I mean, one of the number one destruction of wealth, net worth, is divorce.
One of the most famous examples of this that I can think of is George Lucas of Star Wars fame. Here's a guy who's an artistic genius. A young man in his 20s comes up with American Graffiti and then Star Wars and just creates this tremendous franchise that kicks off wealth for him long term, and he has this humongous enterprise built up, and he's smart enough to buy a studio that can produce computer generated graphics, and that gradually grows into what becomes Pixar. And very famously, he has a divorce later in life, and he has to sell what was an early version of Pixar. He has to sell it off in a fire sale because of his divorce. Because when he got divorced, they split he and his wife's net worth down the middle, and in order to pay her share, he had to liquidate assets, which means he had to sell what would become Pixar for a fraction of its worth. And who was standing there with the money, smart enough to see the value? Steve Jobs, and the rest is history. But that's a very high-profile example of just how destructive divorce is to wealth. Now, don't think that you're going to be one of these people who gets away with it by not getting married, because common law kicks in after a few years, and they treat it just like you're officially married anyway. So choose very wisely the person you choose to spend your life with, and be very careful when it comes to making sure that you make that relationship last, because just financially speaking, it's not worth it to get divorced. Never split the dishes.
The next danger zone is credit cards.
This is a big one.
And this one reminds me of a story. My good friend Cody met Warren Buffett at 18 years old. Here's this young 18-year-old talking to Warren Buffett, and he asked Warren Buffett a profound question. What advice could you give me as an 18-year-old so I could be financially successful? And Warren Buffett kind of paused and looked at young Cody and said, you need to perform plastic surgery. And Cody's like, man, I'm 18, I already need plastic surgery. He said, I wasn't sure where he was going, so I just kind of looked at him with this kind of like, can you elaborate on this look? And he said, if you have credit cards, cut them up. Never use credit cards. Never put debt on credit cards. Pay as you go. Perform plastic surgery. If you cannot control your credit cards, cut them up, perform plastic surgery, and live without credit card debt.
We've talked a lot about credit card debt, and I think we've covered that subject very thoroughly, but it's an important one. It is definitely a financial danger zone because it is always, credit cards are always there, ready to go, ready to service your spontaneous purchases or whatever you're in emergency, they're there to help finance that. And you can so quickly undo months or years of discipline with a spontaneous purchase that a credit card is there ready to go. So certainly beware of credit cards as a danger zone. But there's another danger zone, and this one is lawsuits. We talk as we introduce people to our financial fitness suite of products. One of the things we discovered in our research is one of the top 3 things, survey after survey indicates this, one of the top 3 areas people look to where they think they're going to maybe someday have a financial windfall is in a lawsuit. Now, I got to tell you, the only people who would think that are people who have never been in a lawsuit. Because dealing with lawyers, entering into the civil court system is the most expensive, degrading, frustrating, unfair, stressful situation you could ever imagine. I had a friend one time, we were out to lunch, we were talking about a bunch of different things, and this friend had an elderly relative slip and fall in a public place. And there was a lawyer who had swooped in and was advising this family that there could be a lot of good money if you sue this public facility where this person fell and hurt her wrist or whatever it was. And the family they were almost excited about the possibilities of filthy lucre that they could get because of grandma's broken arm. I was so stunned that an otherwise intelligent group of individuals was kind of frothing at the mouth at the financial possibilities, and I warned them in the sternest terms. I think I went all the way up to the limits of etiquette and politeness in trying to warn them off of this folly of thinking that somehow they could use lawsuits for financial gain.
The old Russian proverb said, before pursuing a lawsuit, dig 2 graves.
Oh, that's so true. So true. Stay away from lawsuits. Don't think they're cute. Don't think they're a route to wealth. Even if you happen to end up with a little bit of money at the end, I've never seen anyone in such situations think it was worth the 2, 3, 4 years of stress and time that it takes to get even a quote victory. So just stay away from lawsuits entirely if at all possible. Now, the other thing that I would say is sometimes lawsuits are unavoidable. Sometimes you are the victim of those, especially if you're in business for yourself. It seems as if to be in business for oneself and start to succeed, you become a target for people who didn't get this advice and think they got some easy money coming through the court system. And so we provide, as just one part of our financial fitness services subscription, we provide prepaid legal insurance where not only can you get your will and powers of attorney put together for free to every subscriber of our financial fitness services in the United States and for a nominal fee in Canada, but not only that, but you get free ongoing consultation with lawyers in the case that you are attacked, that you are on the defensive side of a lawsuit, and you know that you have already prepaid some defense in place, some advice in place to help you know how to navigate those waters. So be very careful when it comes to lawsuits. It's definitely a danger zone, but if you strive in this society and if you take a stand and you seek to profit through a business, chances are you're going to be forced into some legal situations. Know that through the financial fitness subscription, you're covered.
The next danger zone is uninsured accidents and sickness. Now, if you think insurance is expensive, you ought to try having no insurance when one of these situations arises.
There have been a lot of cases, the people we've been in business with and have dealt with and have consulted with over the years, where we've seen people who they're not insured with their car and then they get in an accident, or they're not insured medically properly and they don't have any real coverage when it comes time to start treating a debilitating accident or an illness. And we've seen it even worse, where a young parent will die and there's no life insurance in the family whatsoever. These are tragic situations. It's tragedy on top of tragedy, and it didn't have to be that way. My dad has a phrase that just sticks in my head, and growing up we would do a lot of projects together, and my dad's still famous for the projects he puts together, and he's a craftsman. He does all these wonderful things with woodwork and rehabbing cars and different things he and I have enjoyed through the years. And when you're doing that type of thing, there's a lot of steps in those processes, and you can choose whether to do it all the way right or just kind of coat over it. And one of my dad's phrases is, it's cheap insurance. It's insurance. Now, there are insurance situations that are expensive, but in most cases, covering the fact that something could happen to you tragically in life and spending a little bit, investing a little bit of money to cover your family in a life insurance type situation, in the end, if it were needed, it would turn out to be cheap insurance. Now, we cover that. Again, I promoted our Beyond Financial Fitness Pack in one of the early video installments of this series, but we cover insurance very in-depth in the Beyond Financial Fitness Pack. It's an area of your life that cannot go unchecked. You need to understand the insurances, the various coverages in life, property, health, and others. You need to understand what's available. You need to navigate those waters carefully, and as an adult, you're responsible to get the insurance set up in your life, and if you ever needed it, you'll find out it was cheap insurance. So treat insurance as a financial danger zone. Get a little bit educated on the subject. Get covered where you need to. Don't get coverage where you don't need it, but get the coverage that you do need to make sure that it's not a danger zone for you.
The seventh financial danger zone is status living. Here we go again, trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to live above your means to impress others, and when actually you ought to be focused on impressing yourself by staying within your own financial game plan.
We've covered that one a lot, so we'll let the rest of the video speak to that. But we'll move on to number 8. The number 8 financial danger zone is college education. Oh boy, this is
going up.
We could make a whole video series on this all by itself. Somehow, our societies have gotten convinced that college is a universal good. That's the first point. College may or may not be the right thing for any individual, but it's not the right thing for every individual. And yet social proof, the crowd, has given a universal approval to everybody going to college. It may not be right for every kid coming out of high school. Some kids may desire to go and get the discipline and the opportunities that are available in the military. Some may better be served by getting a vocation and learning how to do something with their hands. Others may go directly into sports, whatever it is. Others may go directly into some type of ministry or service. So we got to be careful whenever society presents something to us as a universal good, as they do a mortgage on a house or those types of, anytime society gives you a universal good, universal approval on something, beware, it's a danger zone. And college is a financial danger zone because of its universal good representation in society, but number 2, because it's such a huge amount of money. Families in our society don't generally think about $250,000 purchases very often. Maybe the only time would be the purchase of a home, and we've given sufficient warning to how dangerous that it could be and how carefully that must be handled. Well, college, if you look at $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year in tuition to get an education times 4 or 5 years, that adds up to an enormous amount. And once again, whenever there's a big purchase standing there and looming on the horizon, you can count on the credit system to show up with a ready-made solution. And in this case, the government even helps with student loans and grants and Pels and all those things. And so anytime you see universal good being proclaimed as an expensive item and then the credit system show up to make it easy to do, beware. Danger. This can have massive financial ramifications. And did you know that student loans in the United States are one of the only things that cannot be wiped away in a bankruptcy? Which means if you stack up a bunch of student loans and get an ill-advised college degree that doesn't get you a job,
no return on investment.
Hardly any return on investment. 38% of college graduates right now are not working in the field in which they got their degree in. They can't even get a job in that degree, so they're getting zero return on that investment, financially speaking. I know there's a lot of other good benefits to taking 4 or 5 years and really diving in and studying hard, and we're certainly pro-education, but not necessarily credentialized education. That's a whole other topic for a whole other video series. But when you think about that, you go through all that investment, you come out with an expensive degree to have all these student loans stacked up, and that debt liability, now once you graduate, now the interest kicks in, those payments start to be due. That strain can be part of what leads you into a bankruptcy situation to begin with. God forbid that it would ever happen to you. But then you go through the bankruptcy proceedings and those debts, those student loan debts are not wiped out. You still owe them, which means the government always gets its money. And so when it comes to college education, don't sign up for the non-thinking universal good. Make sure it's specifically right for the specific student being considered. Number 2, Don't pay for prestige. Don't go for the idea that the more expensive the education or the higher profile of the school, that it actually necessarily means a, quote, better education. It may or it may not. Number 3, be very careful accumulating those student loans as if they're no big deal because, hey, listen, the payments don't start till I graduate. There's no interest until then. Listen, all that catches up with you in time soon enough. So, and there's so much more to say on this subject, but just be careful when you get around the whole concept of a formal education.
Formal education, in other words, must have a return on investment, not just an expense. And the number 9 danger zone is addictions.
This is a big one.
Gambling. You got drugs. There's so many different ways that it doesn't matter how much you make. An addiction is just endless torture. It's constantly after you. People start spending money thinking that they're going to get pleasure from this, but eventually they become enslaved to the thing. They sought pleasure, and then next thing you know, they're enslaved to it. And money is just, you just open up a hole and just throw money in it. It destroys families, destroys relationships, and destroys wealth.
Addictions, there's a bigger aspect to the tragedy of addictions than the financial implications. But in this video, we're focusing on money. In every case where there's an addiction, it is to the detriment of somebody's personal finances. I don't know how many times I've worked with individuals and helped them through their finances, and they've been on track and they've been doing well, but there's something missing. Something isn't adding up. Their finances don't make sense. They've got nothing to show for it, and they've got all this money that's come in and gone out over the years, and you can't really, it doesn't make any sense. In every case, it ended up being some type of an addiction that the person lied about, covered up, hid in the background, and it was killing them financially, not to mention the emotional, relational, and eternal toll it was taking in their life. Financially speaking, it was a wreck too. And so just understand, when you have something that has you need professional help.
Seek outside help.
Get the help you need, because if we just limit the damage, the conversation to the damage that it has on your personal finances alone, it would be worth it to clean up your life and get that monster out.
And the number 10 danger zone is investments, or maybe should I say poor investments, more like gambling. So many people, oh, look at this great return I can get, and all I have to do is put this in, and they start gambling. Here they've done so many of the right principles. They've been able to produce money, produce wealth, and then they take that money and they gamble it on a poor investment.
There's a lot of danger zones when it comes to investing. And again, we talked earlier about the Beyond Financial Fitness Pack. This lists from the low-level risk to the high-level risk. It lists most of the assets that are available to an investor to start pouring your income into and start accumulating a mountain of growing assets that kick off more assets with time. That's the goal. But there's a lot of danger zones built in. You can easily get into the hands of the wrong advice, and you have to proceed so carefully when you start having people advise you about that. Number 2, the fees that are involved in a lot of investments can stack up, and they can eat away at the ability to compound gains over time, and your compounding ends up going to the fees and the person that's advising you instead of into your own account. Number 3, they can become speculative and risky, and they can add risk into your portfolio that you don't need to be there. Number 4, they can complicate your life, and they can even come with legal risks and other things, tax risks, and so you have to proceed so carefully. It's the reason we put together the Beyond Financial Fitness Pack anyway to begin with, because it will guide you through an educational process that will at least make you aware of all those pitfalls in the investing world as you start to accumulate assets. Because a funny thing will happen as you start to get out of debt and compound wealth. All of a sudden, people will come out of the woodwork wanting to borrow money, wanting you to invest money in their pet idea, and you've got to become really good at building up a wall around that and protecting your gains from vultures.
Learn to say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. Beware of the financial danger zones. There are monsters out there that are looking to destroy the wealth and all of the principles that you've done to build your wealth. Stay away from the monsters. Stay away from those danger zones so that you can live the life you've always wanted.